So Cathy, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Thanks, Robbie. It was so funny as you were saying, like, let's take a couple of minutes of silence, a couple of breaths of silence just for the intro. I realized that what I hadn't told you is that I've got my son in the next room and he started sneezing.
Well, I think I said this on one of my other episodes, but I had like a moment of worry midway through one interview where I was like, I put a wash on. And our flat is, it's not, I'm in the far corner of the flat from the washing machine. It's not that big a flat. And I was suddenly like, I've got no idea if the mic is going to pick this up. Normally also, because some people might watch this on video, there's usually a wind chime hanging here, which I took down yesterday because the wind was blowing too much. But I've realized is down. Otherwise, that would be a nice little like meditation bell, which perhaps your son's sneezing can be for you to bring you back to presence when
I did not in this house. We moved about a year and a half ago, but in the last house I had a room with like French doors onto the garden. I remember being in a coaching conversation, and it's probably about this time of year with the doors open, and we were just in that really lovely quiet space, and the birds, my client said to me, she said, is that like a tape that you've got on with birds on?
Yeah,
it was so so beautiful.
It's great. Sorry, that just makes me think that in the we're recording this in what is it, like the middle of June?
This time of year,
it probably won't go out for a little while, but we're also still in kind of semi-lockdown. I'm saying still, hopefully, as though if this comes out in a couple of months, everything's better and we might be free moving around. But as part of that, I've been doing some exercise in my flat, like because I can't go to the gym. And my friend Paul has he has a health business and has some little YouTube videos which he started doing during this but he does them in his garden in Lancashire, and I just love it because there's so much birdsong in Darwin at the moment, as far as I know, and I know that because I'm in Paul's garden like once or twice a week, which is great. It's a really nice part of it.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Just I don't know if that's a good place to start or not, but just seeing the flourishing of ideas that people are just getting on and creating new videos, and it feels like it's what day of the week it is? It's Tuesday, so we were out for a walk on Sunday. My husband does a more of a kind of 9 to 5 Monday to Friday thing, so weekends seem to be a bit more important too than for me, where I just do whatever I want any day of the week. But so we're out for a walk on Sunday, and it felt really aware of more people being out in nature and more people being around. And I was musing, I don't know if this is true, this is just a Cathy musing, but I was musing on the notion that we take retail away, like all the shops in the UK have closed apart from food shops, and they're just reopening again this week. But isn't it interesting how it's completely obvious to fill our lives with stuff that is kind of natural and harmonious, and I suspect slightly rose tinted Cathy musings, but yeah, like people don't need to be told what to do. They just all these people out walking who we don't see on, we're regular walkers, and definitely more people, and you doing fitness and your friend creating videos, and it's just brilliant.
Yeah, there's definitely there's some connection, isn't there, between restrictions and innovation. It's like, okay, there's been a load of restrictions, but a load of people like Paul, like the walkers, thinking, well, how do I feel good? Or how do I exercise? Or what do I do today? And it's like, well, I live in this part of the countryside.
We passed a family, and I kind of stopped them intentionally because I was curious, because it's normally a walk. We get a lot of dog walkers, and not, it's not a kind of family walk. And so this was a family out, sort of young teenage kids, I'd say, mum and dad. And so I just stopped and said, how far have you walked today? And so she got the book, and she said, we're walking the Cotswolds way in sections. This is like, and obviously she was like halfway through, and she was really proud, she just invented this project for the family, and it was fantastic.
Yeah. And it's amazing, like, my friends who have been, a daily walk with the two little girls, one of my friends, it's like, I wonder how I'm sure in some way it will, but I wonder how that will live on as life kind of settles back to normal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, my husband he moaned about the Clatford carers, and then he moaned about the Clatford carers not happening last Thursday when he was it was such a moaner. But it's kind of, and I'm like, I think people just decided to stop. And then actually I read yesterday that apparently it was a conscious thing, stopping, but who knows? But I want to bring this back to, I guess, with a coaching perspective, that you said restriction creates innovation, and I think it's the fact of, and again, by the way, just take everything I say as personal opinion, not like fact, but preface that at the beginning of the call. It's the fact that the restriction kind of knocks us out of habits. That's how it seems to me, that we have we're on tracks of conditioned ways of thinking and doing things, and it's almost a sudden shake is, oh gosh, I'm not on that track anymore. It's not the fact of restriction. We can have that insight in any moment, but restriction seems to do a little bit of shaking, and so therefore opens up possibilities. But we don't need to become attached to the new habits at all, that we can change again in any moment. And
what do you think that shake does? Is it that it gives us more choice? It's kind of like we've seen that we could be walking the Cotswold Way on Sundays now because we can kind of jolt it out of our habits, or what does that jolt give us?
Yeah, and I'm going to say yes to that, and I'm going to put like a heavy, this is my personal opinion, on this, because this is something I've actually thought about, and I think we're recording this, as you say, in the middle of June, and with the very recent conversations around racism, difference, all of that, and I know you want to get into my story part, but I was an economist I trained as an economist. I've got multiple degrees in economics and development economics. So for the first part of my career, I focused a lot on kind of concrete stuff in the world, usually around poverty and inequality. I worked overseas for a few years, and so I've been so that kind of reflection about choices has been coming back to me more recently, with the clearly circumstances affect people's lives, like clearly that's obvious, but what is the connection between what as coaches we're generally working with, which is freedom of mind and encouraging people to see that choice is ever present. So I don't know, this feels like a bit of a half-formed theory in my head, and very much a Cathy theory, but I think the answer to that question is probably yes, is that all of us see life in a certain way. We're on a certain path that's inevitably conditioned by, upbringing, what we've done, and any amount of things. And then there's this other space, which is 100% complete freedom of mind, that allows us to see, gosh, anything's possible. Literally. And I can't even imagine what might be possible. I'm not at all a planning person, because how can I possibly even imagine the things that could be possible for me? Because I can only see what I can see from, I know that space is there. And so somewhere between the restrictions and the paths and the complete freedom of choice, I don't know, most of us live somewhere in the middle space, I think. That some people seem to live very much in their repetitive choices. And I don't know many people who live in complete freedom, but it seems to me the more we can go towards the freedom end, and there is something about opening up choices. I think this is kind of why I brought back the social justice question. Is I don't know, this is a theory completely, but I wonder if certain ways that we live in the world, where we live and how we live, kind of opens up a set of choices, because they're the choices of the people around us and the ancestors. That's how we have lived. And I wonder if there's something about opening up more choices, and that can partly be set by circumstances. And of course, ultimately, I see it as a freedom of mind is the catalyst for that.
It's almost like you can kind of engineer some of that freedom of choice in different ways, and that's often if we think about...
you can draw statistical connections. Like, I know this from the many decades of policy work that I did, that there are concrete links between levels of education and health and the various things. You can draw lots of lines, but they're never 100% explanatory. That's always been the interesting thing, is, well, if that really is the thing that makes the difference, then why doesn't it work 100% of the time? Why are there exceptions that work and don't? Why are there exceptions on both sides? There's something else at play here, and it isn't all about lesson plans in school or housing. And given that, you know, we all know that this sort of happiness or whatever it is that we all seem to be seeking, this state of mind where we feel life has got meaning, we all know that that doesn't depend on how much money we've got in the bank, or we think it does, but we know that it doesn't when we really look at our own life experiences. And yeah, so it's just the stuff that interests me.
Yeah, no, me too, and I love that. I did know, but I'd forgotten that you had that economics background and that part of your life, and it is interesting to bring, you know, here's a thing that you say these are just your opinions, but how many people who have done that kind of work on economics and development and inequality and poverty, and have done this work that you're doing now, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point in this call, but no rush, you know, to do with coaching, like that's a particularly interesting set of experience to have, and because of that there is something, I'm sure, that you have to say that lots of people won't have seen, and I think we're in some of that space in this moment.
Yeah.
And yeah, for what it's worth, I think that's it's a really important thing to think about if people are interested in changing the way people from different backgrounds are able to progress through life. Then comparing, not just thinking that fixing the one thing, that like not fixating on one thing, because it's so complex, right? Is there anything a more perfect representation of a complex system than a human being? And raising I did some complexity theory training last year, and literally the example they give, complicated thing, rocket science. You can work out how to do it. Yes. You can predict how it'll work and know you'll get a rocket to the moon. Complex thing, raise a child. You've got no idea what is going to be a good child rearing choice until after it's done. And then some of them were great and some of them weren't. And things contributed, but the cause and effect is incredibly hard to draw.
Yes, and I'm just going to say, you use the words complicated and complex, and I just wonder how many, like I know what those mean, I just wonder whether you want to say what each of those means to draw out the difference in that theory.
So it's worth just saying, if people are interested, there's a framework by a guy called Dave Snowden, that's how I came across it, called Cynefin, which is a Welsh word, which is hard to spell, so I'll put it in the show notes. And essentially that, as I understand it, I've kind of just done it, but complicated, you might be able to do this better than me, is something which you can predict in advance, essentially. It might be really hard to do, and most of us don't know how to do it, but it is possible. And that might be how to fix a car engine.
I was going to say, like car engine. Rocket science looks like one of those things.
But some people do understand how you get a rocket to the moon. Like, it is possible. Yeah. Okay. Whereas complex, is something that you can't predict in advance. You can't predict causality in advance. You might be able to predict, I guess, things that contribute.
I think the idea with complex, and this is a theory, so it's not something that I'm attached to, but I think that this guy talks about complexity as where you move one thing, it changes everything else in the system. Right. So it isn't like a calm where you move one thing and then it goes faster or slower or whatever. And I would say with the child example, I've got 2 children who are at various stages of growing up. Actually, I do feel like it's simple. So I didn't necessarily think that at first, but now as they're older and we've been through the things we've been through as parents, I'm sure that most parents will go through with their kids' ups and downs and all the hopes and desires, I actually see how really flipping simple it is with children and with humans.
Well, we have to go there then, Cathy, don't we? Drop this thing. You're gonna reveal the secret.
You're gonna leave you like with on the well, yeah. No, I can say more because it comes back to the fact that we're all living lives, so we might put ourselves in this box as coaches. But for me, it's been one of the most interesting things I think I've seen around the 3 principles, which I know we're going to talk about, is that it just comes back to the amount of love that you pour on somebody. I can see you smiling, just in case we're on audio at some point. and that it just looks so simple to me. It looks so simple, is that when my children have been through difficult things, and I may not go into a lot of detail, they don't like it when I talk about them, so it may feel as if I'm being a bit kind of opaque here, but it's just because I respect the fact moms don't post pictures of me on social media,
fair.
Right, okay, I suppose it's your life. But when we've had some ups and downs with them, that we think there's this thing that we do, we think there's this complicated system that we do these things, and we have to do things in a certain way. And I'm sure there are lots of parenting books and people that will tell you to talk to your child in a certain way, or do this or do that, or lock them in their room or don't lock them in their room, all of the stuff that we get told. And actually, I think the only thing that works, or at least the root of where everything that works comes from, is just to pour as much love as you possibly can, and to look at that person, whether it's a child or a partner in a relationship, or a client or a difficult colleague, whatever, the person at the supermarket, and just empty your mind and shower them with metaphorical love. It's real love, but obviously not like literally pouring glitter on them. But and then things will turn out the way they turn out.
I was once on a call with some kind of coaches who were just starting on their journeys, and one of them just kind of paused and said, do you ever just don't you just get on the call with your clients and just love them? It was a really beautiful moment. It was kind of clearly, it's completely stuck with me, and it's like, oh, she's going to be all right in this work. She's got that down. Let's bring it a bit to coaching, Cathy, but of course free in these conversations to go wherever it goes, but we're starting to move in that direction. You told us a little bit about what happened before you moved into this work. How did you first come across coaching?
I'm pausing here, you haven't lost me, but it's, I guess, as a kind of concept, I mean, we all know about sports coaches and football coaches, but I guess as a concept in my life, it was when I was in a leadership program. I was always a sort of high-flying type, and in one of the leadership programs that I did, we had coaches, and actually we had the opportunity. That's when I did my first qualification. We had the opportunity to go deeper with it for ourselves. Yes, I've got a bit of a cough today. I was out last night on the my neighbour invited me to go kayaking, and I think I got a bit much sun and too many insects flying around on the river. But
what river is it? Where you're in
the
Cotswolds?
I'm on the edge of the Cotswolds, so it was, even he didn't know actually, it was the Avon, I think, which runs into the Severn. So it was sort of a little river. It was very nice. Beautiful. So I think that was it, probably in the kind of mid 2000s-ish, about that sort of time. Having said that, I was also slightly hesitating, because I hear a lot of coaches say, oh, people always came to me a lot for advice. I always felt like I was in that kind of mentor-ish sort of role and not really knowing what it was. And that's been me too, like partly in kind of real jobs that I've done as a policy advisor, or in a strategic role where I'm not necessarily the person implementing on the street, but I'm the person kind of directing. And so there's a very clear lesson you learn at some point in that role, which is you might have lots of bright ideas, but when you've got extremely large budgets and programs, that people who are implementing may not have exactly the same ideas, and you can get irritated with them for getting it wrong, or you can try and find a way of working with them, helping them see something for themselves. So in a way, that role is always, it's always been part of what I've done. I've tended to be much more the person directing than the person running around doing the things. But I think actually the word coaching, and my first experience of having a coach, was in that leadership program, and it was a mixed experience, to be honest. I thought the coaches were a bit mediocre, kind of. I could see there was something there, but it didn't feel like it was as helpful as conversations with my line manager. That's to be completely truthful about it. It was okay, I can see there's something, but I'm not quite sure what it is.
And so what then? How did it come back into your life, or how did it come back in a way that gradually did become more, there's something here and I want a bit more of it?
I think again, over time, I was very, and about that time as I started to get into more senior roles, and so I did less and less, didn't do a lot of technical economics, but I was in more of kind of traditional leadership role, directing people rather than directing content. I became much more interested in what it is that this question of what it is that creates change in people, which is it's a question we've alluded to with the overlap between circumstances and state of mind. And it again, it was that. It's the, what is it I can do in my position here with all of the stakeholders and the people that I work with, including politicians. I was working very closely with politicians at that time. What is the thing that is helpful? And sometimes it's about the information and the quality of the information. My husband's a statistician, and we have these kinds of conversations a lot, and he's very attached to the quality of his data and the argument and the strength of the science. And yeah, you're nodding that you can empathize with that, like that too. But what is the piece that makes somebody open to the argument, or what is the piece in the argument that makes them change? And I observe particularly, I think, in the work when I was working more directly with politicians, is that I could spend months on these huge pieces of work, or I could send a sort of throwaway remark in an email, and that sometimes would be the thing that got picked up, and oh my gosh, you're such a genius, and this is like brilliant. It's like, I just like was a throwaway remark in an email, and nothing at all to do with my brilliance, by the way. But yeah, just like those kinds of questions. And what is it about engaging staff at work, and why are some people just objectionable all the time? Why be so exhausting to be, just all of those questions about human nature and how we engage in a work situation. That was front of my mind. And so I think that's how I eventually came on a path to, okay, well, maybe executive coaching is this like thing that seemed to be the thing that was in front of me, and went on that route and had a look at their models and their ways of doing things. And, as you do, you kind of dip in and dip out. And I think from that moment of seeing that there was this thing called coaching, it felt like there was something to it, but I hadn't found the thing. It still felt like there was a superficiality to it. And it's taken a long time, many offshoots and dead ends to suddenly think, okay, now I get it.
And so you said that the first view was sometime, the first spot of this thing, coaching as we mean it, as most of us would talk about it, was in the mid 2000s. And so as this shift was happening, as you were kind of seeing something here about changing people's minds, about changing people, about how cultures happen and why some people are really, really annoying in a work environment.
Nobody that I work with directly, by the way, I'll just say that. If anybody's listening.
Good save. I have worked with some annoying people. If any of them are listening, I'm sure it wasn't you. And so what were you kind of picking up? So it's like there was some kind of slightly shallow coaching stuff, but what was the good stuff over those next few years that kind of caught your eye or your ear? Or
the good stuff was about understanding people. Actually, I should probably say that's kind of coming back to me now. I've got a terrible memory, but I got very fascinated with the kind of the profiling direction. So personality tests, strengths finders, all of that kind of set of things. It looked to me like there was something. Actually, it's interesting. I feel like I'm only maybe making this connection now, but it looked to me like there was something more interesting and useful in the understanding of people and the understanding that we have of each other. I remember doing a team thing at that time with my team around the Myers-Briggs model, and just spending time in the understanding versus the kind of tools and questions and models that certainly executive coaches that I worked with and at some point became, that felt like you're trying to put me in a box that you think is useful, and quite frankly it just looks like, why would I even go in your box? It doesn't even look like fun to play with. There was that I think was the difference. And actually and again, this is just, I say this is me, this is my preference. I'm not saying this is all of you coaches need to go and do this. You're like, no, this is me. And I think that's something that I found really true in the way that the principles is taught and that we implement as coaches and as all sorts of practitioners, is that it comes back to a fundamental understanding, and we're not trying to change or direct or really do anything, but that behavior comes from understanding and actions come from understanding. So the more that we can stay in that space, then everything else just becomes obvious to do or not do. And so coming back around to the kids and the clients and pouring love on them, that is an explanation of what's happening when we have less on our minds. That's how it seems to me. It isn't a doing. It isn't I'm going to clear my mind and do my 3-step love exercise. It isn't a doing. And doing, if it helps clear your mind, great. But it's an explanation of presence, complete presence.
And maybe that's a nice place to go now. It feels like there's a load of places we could jump off from what you've just said. But I think you're the first person on this I've had on the podcast who calls themselves a 3 principles coach, and it'd be probably really nice for people who haven't come across that if you could just speak to that first, perhaps how you came across it then, and was that the place where it finally felt like, you said you kind of, finally maybe I've got it now. It might have been that, I don't know, and then give people a bit of a sense of what that means.
Yes, and I kind of say it slightly shorthand. I often don't say it. I can't remember whether I do or I don't say it on my website. It's not like in a job description. I call it transformative coaching or leadership coaching or something that, is more likely for people to have heard of. So in a way, I'm using it as a shorthand because you know what I mean. And we sort of touched on it in our exchange of emails. So it was part of the journey. I went through this kind of up and down and lots of offshoots and what am I even really doing in this thing since I left work. And it was about, I'm kind of trying to remember now, about 2013, I think. So, in a little while in the weeds, as they say. And I still had this sense for something in coaching, but I just still felt like I hadn't quite landed. And I'd been on Michael Neill's email list for a long time. And some of you will know him, some of you won't. If you do, great. If you don't, just go and Google him. He's all over the place. And he had come into the principles in around 2010, I think, maybe slightly early, which I didn't know. I had, no awareness. I was vaguely on this guy's email list. And he did something, I think I did I had got a 3-day workshop or one of those, one of these things that he'd done and called Coaching from the Inside Out. I think it was the first time he did it. And I thought, coaching, that's what I need. I need to, let me get a handle on this thing called coaching. And the first time I listened to it, it felt like being at somebody's dinner party when they're all talking about their best friends and you're not out of place, but you just kind of, okay, you guys sound like you're having a good time, but I don't really know what you're talking about. It felt like that. And I thought, oh, okay. So I put the thing away. And then about a year later, I had come around again. Actually, I was in a mastermind. And again, this is it's amazing what stuff comes back to you when you get asked questions. I was in this mastermind. I think it was about then, or was it a bit later? Oh, timelines. I'm a bit hazy with timelines. And again, I was feeling like I just hadn't quite landed on the thing. And one of the guys said to me, I can't now remember the exact words, but they basically said, you look like you're kind of faffing around a bit, Cathy. What the hell are you doing? It was that kind of a question.
Were you faffing around?
Oh yeah, completely. Like I didn't, of course.
So, actually, maybe if you could just what was happening? Like you said, I think you said you'd left work.
Oh yeah, I left work way back in 2009, 2010. And at that point,
why did you leave work?
Well, why did I leave work? I got to that point. So what, about 10 years ago. So I was in my early mid 40s, and I got to a point where I thought, gosh, I can stay. I really loved my job, and I thought I can stay in this job for the next 20 years. People did. That's what they did. They stayed in their jobs, then they retired.
And were you working for the government?
I was working for the government. Yeah, I was working for the UK government, and or I can not work for the government. I can go do something else. And we actually both left. Both my husband and I left work at the same. We were crazy. Actually, I don't know what we were thinking. We just thought, let's just leave.
What do you think? Because this is interesting, right? Especially because we've been talking about seeing possibilities and freedom of mind to do something that's unexpected to a lot of people. So what do you think it was that had the two of you in that place just going, let's just leave?
Well, I can see a bit more of a path for him because he had been doing a little bit of consultancy, a very, very small amount, and I think he'd been wanting to leave to build his consultancy career for a little while. And I had been discouraging towards that because he massively over dedicates the amount of time. So he'll say, you know, I'll do this 2-week contract, and then he'll spend like 6 months doing this 2 weeks. He's that sort of, that's just like who he is. And so in my mind, I'm thinking he's going to make a really bad self-employed consultant because he's never going to have enough contracts to pay the bills because he spends too much time on his, you know, how wrong we can be. It's so funny how we make up things about people. And so I've been slightly discouraging. And then at some point, I think it's just like, oh, well, fuck it. I actually don't know. I mean, I could probably make up something now. But back then, I can't even remember what it was. And there was something about, you know, not being in a 9-to-5 and having more time around. The kids were not tiny. They were, one was born in 94, one was born in 2000. So, you know, the youngest would have been approaching 10. They weren't tiny kids, you know, they were sort of medium to larger sized children. Yeah, I don't know. It was just a moment of craziness. And I've overheard him on conversations talking to people saying, oh, he must have been mad.
Yeah.
And I think our friends probably did think we were mad. And isn't it interesting how things work out, actually? You know, that's another huge lesson looking back over that time, is that we think, and I see a lot of people thinking this going into any kind of self-employment, we make up a lot of stuff around money, around what we need to live, what we need to do, where money needs to come from. And it just often doesn't work out like that. And it's so much easier to be free around that than it is to commit ourselves to a particular path. And I kind of say that because I see a lot of people, and I'm sure you've got coaches listening to this who are moving into or already into their own business or working as an associate or a consultant, or, you know, a lot of us are in very small operations, making up what that means around their status and their income and how the business has to look in order for them to do what they do. And this was a much newer revelation to me, by the way, but in the last couple of years, I just feel like I've completely uncoupled those things. It's so bizarre, Robbie.
Those things, it's money and
coaching,
how my business works and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. And yeah. And it's so bizarre, actually.
Yeah.
But so at that time, like, you know, back in 2009, 2010, and the idea was that he would grow his consultancy business, which he's done and has continued to do, and I would be more kind of at home and figuring out what to do, and because he travels, his work involves flying all around the world, so that's not easy to do when you've got one person in full-time employment. So it was a kind of a family, let's just rejig this whole arrangement. And so for a while I did feel like I stumbled around trying to reclaim my kind of status in some way as a professional employed person, and then it took a while to just realize how foolish that was.
But even then you were listening to the Michael Neill thing, you were in a mastermind of some kind, so there was this interest in what was the kind of focus at that point? That's a kind of weird question, but it's like, why were you in the mastermind, I guess, is the question that I'm asking.
No, absolutely. I guess for business, like I thought I had this thing called a business, a coaching practice, and I did a lot of groups and training, and, you know, I had things. So
you were working as a coach by this point?
Yeah, I was working as a coach, absolutely, by that point, and mostly with an orientation towards it hadn't become fully, actually now I say I primarily call it leadership. It was a mix of people in smaller enterprise type businesses and people in organizations. I never went towards the corporate traditional executive coaching model because I didn't want to be away from home. I wanted something where I could work very flexibly from home. So I went much more towards the kind of personal coaching, I guess we'd call it, but to do with things around people and businesses and work. Now I feel like I've implanted myself in some ways completely freely. I work with people, but also it's much clearer to me that I have more fun with people who are in leadership roles of one sort or another, and we can talk about what that was. So the journey into the principles kind of bring this thing all the way back around. Nice. In the mid whenever it was 2013, 14, 15, like that period, I kind of dipped into Michael Neill's world a little bit more deeply, thought, okay, you seem like a really nice guy, but yeah, whatever. Went back out again, and actually, I think, in fact, it was a year later. It was the second time when I had this challenge from my mastermind partner. What the heck are you doing? That I went back and picked up the recordings of this course that I had been part of a year before, thinking, okay, well, I'm going to really, really just look deeply at coaching. I didn't want to turn away from it. I thought there's something here. I'm going to give it a go. And if it's not for me, it's not for me. But this is like, I'm going to really, really look at it, really try and figure out what this thing is and how I want to engage with it or not. And so I went back to the Michael Neill training, and I just heard it completely differently. It was like a different program talking about different things. It sounded completely different. And he talks a little bit, became a little closer to his world, and he talks a little bit more explicitly about the three principles, which we can talk about. And then I retrained. I've done Michael's Supercoach Academy. I've done he has an advanced track. As he jokes at those people who didn't get it the first time around. So yeah, I've worked quite close with Michael for quite a while now. Yeah,
and we could ask you loads of stuff about that. And yeah, for people who haven't checked out Michael Neill, there's I feels like he's quite an important person in the coaching industry in lots of ways. A lot of his ideas have gone to a lot of places, and if you spend a bit of time on calls with him or listening to his stuff or reading his books, you'll find insight in them, whatever kind of coach you are, really. I think he's got a lot of great stuff to say.
I think so. I don't want to feel like I'm avoiding talking about Michael, but his stuff's so out there that if you don't know him, or even if you do know him, go to his website. You can find him, michaelneill.org, I think he is. He's got, at least one, if not 2, 3 podcasts. He's got some. We're in the middle of the he's so prolific.
Yeah.
We're in as we're speaking right now, in June 2020, he's got some of his stuff that he's made available for free during the lockdown. I don't, his paid programs that are not always free. He does a lot of very accessible, low-priced programs right up to his, he does the coaching model of having an apprentice and all of that kind of stuff. And he does these Supercoach Academy coach trainings, which he's been doing for, I'm not exactly sure how long, maybe approaching 10 years, perhaps, maybe a bit less. I'm not 100% sure on that. And they've changed, obviously, as he's changed, and it's now a fully immersive coaching from a 3 principles perspective. And so, like, the 3 principles, just to put a bow on that, people who don't know, it's kind of a framework for describing how we work as humans. And Sid Banks, a guy back in the 70s, had an enlightenment experience and saw, as many of us glimpse, gosh, there's this thing called life, and then there's all this stuff in my head. And the sort of classic moment of his enlightenment is he's on some kind of a course program, weekend away relationship thing, I think it was, and somebody said to him, "Oh, Sid, you're not insecure, you just think you are."
Great.
And which is the kind of remark we say to our friends all of the time. And for some reason, he heard that as something really true, and it changed his life. And he went on to talk more about his enlightenment experience, what he'd seen, and it came to be described as the 3 principles. And I will talk about what they are. We can, feel free. Yeah, I know it feels like, okay, tell me the three. Yeah. But again, I want to preface this by saying, like, this is a framework for describing what just looks like how we operate as humans. And it looks as real to me as other frameworks and other ways of seeing the same thing. So this isn't kind of a teaching. This is just, if we've got a Rubik's Cube, this is like saying, this is an orange side on the, it's what we're describing is the Rubik's Cube. We're describing this thing called how humans work. And it's a very, very straightforward framework of saying that there is an underlying intelligence to life. There's so much that's in the subconscious that we, and especially I think in the West, Robbie, we're so attached to this, like worshipping the god of the intellect, my brain, I have to be able to, you know, this sort of scientific method that my husband is so proud of, and all of these things.
And it's given us lots of things.
And to me there's a big and the and comes before that. What is it that even directs? My friend was telling me about somebody she knew wanted to go on a mission to Mars or something, and I think, gosh, that would just never enter my head to go on a mission to Mars. But there you go, there are people going on, and like, isn't that amazing? And so for me, that this, you know, this expression of the innate intelligence in all of us is the fact that we have this incredible creative pull and desire, and we just want to do things and make sense of things, and like that's part of having this huge, you know, how could we describe or explain or model what that is? It's just, to me, it's just there, and I know it, and it's bigger than my brain. So there's that, and that we have a human experience, we have a lived experience, and that we live it because we are conscious beings. You know, consciousness is not a word only associated with principles, but in any sense of it, whether in a neuroscience sense of consciousness or the very spiritual tradition sense of consciousness, we have an awareness of, like, I'm looking out of my window and looking at the day and looking at you, and, you know, I have an awareness, and I have a lived experience, and my lived experience comes through my awareness. And so right back at the beginning of the conversation, when we talked about, you know, kind of structural things versus freedom of choice, what that does when you really see, gosh, I have my lived experience through my own consciousness, is knowing the truth of the knowing that that's how I'm having my experience allows me to know fundamentally to be true that that's like one sliver of all of the possibilities of things that I may or may not do or have or turn towards. I don't feel as bound by my lived experience as I might do if I felt that was the only thing that was available to me.
And so you gradually came to hold this particular frame through that training, through other learning, probably. You probably talked about some of them already, but what for you were the impacts of this frame?
Yeah, I think, well, I kind of question the learning because, sorry, I've got a squeaky chair. One of the things I think, you know, that Michael will say, and I think pretty much any principles practitioner you speak to will say, is that we're not learning something. It's not like, oh, this is framework and how does it apply to my experience. It's to me, again, this is personal opinion, to me it's more like I'm being better attuned to what's relevant to listen to and what isn't, and where the, you know, the things that move the needle, what are those things. And so because the principles has helped me explain a framework that I happen to resonate with, because it's helped me see, oh, okay, this is a bit of a clearer signal, and this is a bit, why am I getting a bit kind of sidetracked with this thing over here? Because it's helped me see that more clearly, then it's explained all sorts of things, like right back at when I first, well, you know, even right back the whole of my life, I guess, basically. I was on in another mastermind, a different mastermind, but we were in our meeting last week, we were talking about, one of the members was talking about her parents and her dad, and again we were in the kind of races and lineage sort of conversation, and I shared something about my mum and how my mum was, and what sort of particular attributes she had. And you know, we're in life because of all sorts of things, and so I guess for all of my life the focus on equality and why do we live differently, and why do we seem to treat people differently? All of that's always been around. And so, back to that, or back to when I first came into coaching and trying to understand what it is that makes some people flourish and some people just be objectionable. What is that? How do we influence people? Like all of the things that I've been trying to understand better, it feels to me like the Principles has a way of shining a light on all of those things, and a way of making the path that I feel like I've been on for my whole life just a little bit easier, a little bit different, a little bit more obvious. Because had I known which things to tune into and which things not to tune into, I might have taken different paths. I might not. It doesn't matter to me. So that's like, so it's not like a teaching thing. You learn it and then you apply it. It's more like it's an understanding. It's more like a tuning. And so the areas it's been most impactful, I think eventually on my work, like that probably took the longest. So funny, isn't it? How we get tied up with things. I think the kids has been a really big thing. You're around people all of the time, every single day, and you have you have no choice with these things that are in front of you. It's not like I just don't like that job, I'm going to leave it. It's like, can I turn you back, get new ones? Thought about that, but you don't get to choose your kids. They just come as they are. And that's been a really big one. And how actually, what we talked about before, what it is that makes the difference with other humans. Relationship, definitely. Definitely. I see a lot of people in the Principles communities really sometimes leaving their relationships, actually, but often a flourishing of relationships. It really, because again, you're around these people all the time. And so I had a friend come to stay, and for another Principles coach, and we were stacking the dishwasher together, and she said, you said you put the forks that way up. She said, why do you do it? And I said, I don't know, actually. My husband and I kind of laugh about that sometimes because he puts them the other way. And she said, my ex-boyfriend and I argued about this all of the time. And I was so attached to the forks being one way, and he was so attached to them being another way. And I mean, it sounds like she's talking about forks in the dishwasher.
But everyone's had those fights, right? Almost everyone has.
Politics, or it's the guy in the car who drives like an idiot, or it's the person at work. I know I keep referring to this imaginary objectionable person. It's like we've all had that. We've all had those things that just thought, gosh, if you would just do it my fucking way, life would be so much easier. And I still say that to my husband. I still say, why don't you just do it my way? And then we laugh. It's like, I know in the moment I'm saying it, I really felt annoyed, and then you realize how stupid it is and you let it go.
And the Principles are one of the things that has really helped you see,
I think really helped me
attune to what's real, and see when it's just, this is just a silly thing about forks. I can just let this go in this moment.
Yeah, and my friend could see that. She was asking me, and I didn't have any attachment. And I was like, actually, I think your way actually makes more sense than my way. But I'm just in the habit of doing it my way. Like my openness, her openness, the fact that she could see what. And okay, I'm sure there was more to stacking the dishwasher and her ex-boyfriend, and perhaps he wasn't the right. But it's those sorts of things like. We make such a meal out of these tiny things, and we can have an argument about stacking the forks in the dishwasher, but we don't have to stay in that argument for the rest of the evening. It doesn't turn the TV off on it, Yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned politics there. I was kind of wondering about that before you even mentioned that, how, if you think about the modern day, most of us, we're living in a weird social experiment where social media has happened, and no one really asked us if that was a cool thing, but it's happened and it's happening. And the last 4 or 5 years have been kind of very strange culturally. I wonder, how do you think that have you really, because you brought that as an idea in, have you noticed that happening? You've kind of got into like with the forks, you've got into the conversation or the exchange, you've gone, oh, we're doing this weird thing. I can just let this go right now. Is that what's happened, or how is it?
Well, I guess I have two levels. It's the level of, what I think about the outside world, which I can talk about all day, by the way. I have lots of opinions about lots of things. And then what I'm more interested in at the moment is thinking about how and where I engage with things. So I had a real not an epiphany, it wasn't an epiphany, but I felt like I had a real moment after the last election, which was it about a year ago? I'm trying to remember now.
Less now, kind of
It
6 or
was
7 months, wasn't
6
it?
or 7 months. It was last year, wasn't it, Robbie, in the UK, our last election. And I live in a very marginal constituency, and I was not voting for the incumbent. I was voting for the in fact, I did end up voting for the incumbent because I didn't want the other guy to win. But I have always been kind of closely engaged in politics in one way or another. Obviously worked for the government for a long time, worked at a very senior level, closely with politicians. I have been interested in how we can shift the political conversation. And I had somebody I knew as not a friend, a kind of an associate, who was in the process of setting up a new party in the UK. And I was kind of curious about what he was doing to change the debate. And it's felt like a conversation I've wanted to be part of, forever pretty much. And at the last election, when the Conservative government won again, and I had a conversation with one of my neighbours who our dogs are they're kind of dog buddies. My dog comes along and she's got lady dogs, and he's like, oh, big excited, loves her lady dog. It's so funny. And she's she campaigned for the Tories, and I was quite surprised at the again, a kind of fairly it felt like a fairly loud voice for the insecure right. I'll explain what I mean by that if you want. And I said to her, gosh, I was quite surprised by the outcome of the election. And she said, oh, I wasn't. I was knocking on doors, and I kind of felt like I had the mood of the country. And there was a moment where I thought, yeah, there's like all these people out there and all this like thing I have an opinion about. And I could understand what she was saying, and I felt like I had a much deeper compassion in that moment for people who were voting Conservative, people who'd voted Brexit. And I could kind of see more clearly where that was potentially coming from. And I just thought I want to step back from this thing that looks like, politics to me, and bring everything down to a much smaller scale. So I don't look for, and what that looked like before was that I might go and speak to groups, or I might do trainings, or I might do things that were oriented for people who were either part of politics or engaged more actively in the political debate than me, worked with a politician directly, things like that. I thought, okay, this feels like something I'm getting a new understanding of, and I want to step back from that. And so what I'm curious about now, I haven't arrived at anything, but what I'm curious about now is, where are the things that I'm engaging, and what is it that's really shifting? And what if it wasn't changing politics, this thing, what if there was not this thing out there, but there was something else about love and compassion and consciousness, and there was something else at a more human level. And that sounds probably very vague, because it's vague in my mind.
It doesn't sound that vague. I think the thing that I just want to check about is, in that conversation where I guess it sounds to me like, but this might be wrong, so if it is, pull it out, that there had been this kind of much more active interaction with literal politics, the kind of people who do that stuff. And there's something about this interaction with the neighbour, you brought that in, gave you more compassion, is what you said. And is that then what kind of slowed you down, or ended with this place that you've just described, which is there might be something big but different that is where you want to spend your time or your energy, or those kind of things?
I think what it did is, it did not necessarily give me more compassion for I want to say not getting more compassion for her sounds like I have no compassion for her. It was not what it was. It wasn't a kind of a me her thing. It was I just realized that I had maybe lost sight of the human, and that we describe politics, we describe parties. It had looked to me as if engaging in a certain way with certain groups, certain individuals, was therefore going to lead to some shift in the system, I guess, if I'd had to. Why do you do these things? Well, it looks like if I engage with my friend who's trying to set up a political party, and we do it slightly differently, and we do the things, that would lead to change. And I suddenly thought, I have a lot of expectations, or I have a kind of a theory of change in my mind that I probably hadn't been aware of. And I had thought that doing X would lead to Y. I guess it comes back to the complex. It's complicated in my mind. I guess I had, and again, this was, it was completely an unconscious awareness that perhaps became conscious, that I suddenly saw that I was doing certain things because of what I expected them to lead to, or to change, or to do. And I kind of can't even almost say what it was, but there was something about that I thought, okay, you need to back off here. This is not, I guess, again, it's a tuning mechanism, isn't it? Is that's not the thing that moves the needle. And I know that because of how it feels. It's the same in the argument about the dishwasher. If I find myself getting irritated by my extremely irritating husband, like, I know that feeling. Well, if you would just bloody not put your washing on the floor and then the cat wouldn't pee, like, I know that feeling. And so sometimes I'll argue because that's what we do, and sometimes I'll shut my mouth because my tuning mechanism is a bit more alert that day. But I know whether I go down the road or not, I know the feeling as clear as black and white. And I guess in that arena I suddenly became a bit more attuned to okay, this is not how change happens, Cathy. You're doing this stuff because you have some agenda here.
Yeah, how interesting. And I think there, I get it. I think that there's something about the whole arena of politics which particularly taps into a load of our groupishness, which makes it seems to make it much easier for us, even people who are trying to attune to these things, to forget loads of stuff that we know when we get into those kind of conversations and interactions. And I like the idea. You just got the sense that this isn't how it feels when we're doing the thing which changes everything.
Yeah. And I think talking about it out loud, which I've done a little bit but not a lot, is making me realize it's that thing about me. It's that my agenda and my attachment and my expectations, which is the thing that I probably tuned into. And so seeing that, of course, makes me suddenly have realized that I'm not having compassion for people who don't have my agenda, because, of course, my agenda's right and they're just wrong. Why can't they see it my way?
Obviously.
Don't they know the folks who are damned? It's exactly the same.
Yeah. So often it's exactly the same.
Yeah. 100% of the time. That's exactly
only always. Exactly. Yeah.
Always. And sometimes we don't see it. And some people I know will be listening to this thinking she's a crazy person. Yeah. She understand. Yeah. Well, that's just how I see the world, and I understand that's not how you see the world, and that's fine too.
Absolutely. Cathy, there's so many places we could go from here.
What would make it fun for you?
Fun is a good. Well, there's a couple of things. There's some little hanging threads. The truth is, what we've just been talking about makes it fun for me in some ways, because I think that whole conversation is absolutely fascinating. And some of my favorite learning in the last few years has been to understand how, if we think about the how do people work question, which is also partly how I came to this.
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't you share that with me, because it feels like a lot like I've been talking, which I could do all day, but I'm really curious. I know you've got at the back of your mind this is for coaches, and I've got this thing that they like to, but why don't you put that on?
We also said off air, didn't we? My intention for these conversations is to have a conversation a bit like we've been saying. One of the things I learned after one of these early episodes was, the more I worry, this is not quite, maybe this is true, I don't know, I'm going to say it anyway. The more I worry about whether it's a good interview, and if we're doing exactly the things we should be doing, the less good a conversation and interview and podcast it is, and that the game is about presence and effortlessness and all those things. So by all means. So the thing that I would recommend to absolutely anyone who's interested in the cultural, or the person, the thought leader, interested in the cultural conversation around politics, is a guy called Jonathan Haidt, who is an American moral psychologist. And when I can't remember how I came to it really, but when I read his book, The Righteous Mind, why good people fall out over politics and religion, or something like that is the subtitle. That just really, it's quite a long book. He's a great writer, one of my favorite nonfiction writers. He's got a book about happiness as well, which is really worth checking out. And one more recently, which feels very relevant. Again, he's based in America, but his third book is The Coddling of the American Mind, which is his take really on what he saw as worrying trends on campus. Which may
my
even
student son started on that topic. Oh my God.
Right. Which
you're
may
the
now
second person to mention. I know Jonathan Haidt, and I haven't read any of his books, but you're the second person to mention The Righteous Mind to me. So I'm going to write that down because I haven't read it. And I know a little bit of what he talks about. And I think with many of these things that he's pointing in the same direction as I would point out from a principles language, which is that we get attached to these, the awareness we're having of what looks true to us in the moment. And so we continue to fight for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
the bitter end.
The
kind of most beautiful bit of quote, I'm not going to get it quite right, from The Righteous Mind is something like, morality binds and blinds. It binds us into groups that fight so tightly as though the very existence of the world depends on it, and it blinds us to the fact that all the groups are made up of good people with something interesting to say.
And one of the I'm just going to say something, but I won't, because it's an opinion, not a true thing. But I think there's a difference, and I've repeated this again and again about an understanding versus a framework for action, and I think that sums it up, because at the root of good people, like I too take the perspective that we are all good. We're all made up of this inherent, innate intelligence. We all have access to it, and for some people it's in some moments. For all of us, it's more clouded than it is for others. And so often we turn that into an identity or a political affiliation, or we turn that, a job. Everybody who's on the search for their life purpose, like we turn it into, I know this feeling is here, what can I turn it into, which is going to deepen and strengthen it? And we turn it, and again, for innocence, like me too, we turn it into this thing. And then the thing, we become so attached to the thing, the path, that we're blinded to where it came from. And so we lose that responsiveness and the ability that we just made up, this thing called universities, like before we talk about what we do and don't do on campus, like who made this thing up? We evolved this system of doing things. We can unevolve it in any moment. And we lose that where it came from, and the fact that we've all got it and we share it. And for me, that's the moving the needle piece, is not so much in the detail of what rules and regulations we have around being on campus together, but the fact that if we see the goodness in all of us, and we're able to see that we have opinions and differences, and play with those rather than being attached to those. And somebody somewhere will write down a set of rules and we'll say, yeah, sure, let's live with these for a while until we decide to change them. Let's go off, and so we can be on campus rather than just sitting around under a tree talking about being on campus.
Right. And what a difference that is between, at least how it looks from the outside, how some of these things happen.
So what else have you seen about human nature? Sorry, I'm
talking. Oh no, go on.
No, I was just curious because I said what's fun for you, and you said, this whole conversation around human nature and how we think, and like I'm curious about that. What have been the big pieces for you? I don't know too much about the work that you do.
Yeah, look, more broadly and more recently than reading Jonathan Haidt, something very similar really to you. It's I think I've said this before on some things, but it's worth saying again because it was a real moment for me. Last year I heard this guy called Jordan Hall speak, and he said that it was on a he's like a futurist or something like that, but he was on this panel, and the panelist, the guy running the panel, asked, I think it was just after Extinction Rebellion's first big protest, so the idea of extinction was really in mind. And the guy asked, if we're facing existential problems for the human race, what should people do? Or how do we get through it? And some of them gave really great answers, kind of really, what I thought were really clever answers. It's like some really clever people who have thought about this a lot, saying, here's a way that we can, try and get through the environmental stuff or whatever it was that they were particularly most worried about. And Jordan Hall, it felt like, said something, it was in a slightly different thought, and it felt complexity fit for me was one of the things about it. But he said, well, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I've come up with an answer. I've been thinking about this for a decade. Would you like to hear what I've come up with? It's like, yes, please. I would like to hear
it's
that.
going to be really clever if you
tell us. Yeah,
I know,
so we can do it.
The anticipation.
And he said, well, we can work out what is the unique mix of gifts and talents that we have, and really get a good understanding of that. Because the aim would be, if there's a real challenge facing us, how do we make the biggest contribution we can, do our best. And we do that by understanding the unique mix of skills we have, the experience we have, and how that places us to make an impact in the world, and then use that. But then we also need to do the work to what he calls be sovereign of ourselves, which I think is what you're speaking to, right? With the attunement. I think it's exactly the same thing. So that in every moment we're being as skillful as we can. And we can know as best we can that we're not making things worse with the way that we apply ourselves to the world, and we're making things better, because in complexity, we might be pushing at one thing, thinking it is absolutely doing it with the absolute best of intentions, but we can only know we're making things better, or be as sure as we can be, if we are as attuned to that thing that you've been talking about as we possibly can. So that idea has had an impact on me, and in different ways. Partly the reason it had the impact is because it was, as often these ideas do, it was expressing something that I could already kind of feel. And it was like, yes, that is what I wish I'd been able to say myself. And now I can.
It's a resonance, isn't it? It's a resonance. I often talk about this with clients, is that it's the achievement, I guess, is that he's saying something which amplified something that you probably weren't completely aware of in you. And he's
absolutely.
So it's not his idea, it's the...
Right, and I think a Michael Neill thing that I like when you say it's not his idea. I think it was Michael Neill, or maybe he just repeating someone else, said, there's no new wisdom in the world. We're all just sharing the same wisdom, but we can do it with our own 5% flavor. And I happen to like his 5% flavor, but it's absolutely the wisdom that was.
Michael talks about that a lot. The fact that we're all speaking from this innate intelligence, which most principles practitioners will say is universal intelligence, more in the direction of a kind of spiritual understanding. And I also hear people talking about, right brain, left brain neuroscience, and I think they're actually talking about the exact same thing. So however it looks for you, this, iceberg in your brain, or this universal innate intelligence, I don't know what it is. So pick. And he talks about that and in my flavor. And Michael uses that a lot. And you have some people and you like their flavor more than somebody else's flavor, and just go with the people whose flavor you like. That's But I think there's something interesting in I don't know that guy, so I'll go and have a look more, but there's a couple of things in that which I hear. One with my economist leaning, which is the unintended consequence. I have a seminar that I've run a couple of times that I know you asked me about what projects am I working on, and I didn't have anything, but this is one that I feel like I want it to be something. It will turn into something. I call it provocative questions for social change. And one of my questions is, what if it's about unintended consequences? Like, don't be attached to what if we don't know as much as we think, and what if we don't know the things that we do don't turn out the way we expect. And of course that's life. That's what happens with something, is it has a whole lot of unintended consequences in this complex model of the way that we live that you couldn't possibly have imagined. And I deeply believe that somebody who initiates something it's not setting something up to have bad impacts. They're setting it up with something that looks like a sensible intervention, and then all of these unintended consequences. So there's something about that being very real. Is like we play games with Lego, and we don't know at what point the Lego is going to look like a monster, or it's going to look like a swan. It's like, oh, that's how it turned out. Okay, well, interesting. But there's something about the humility and what he talks about, the word sovereign, I guess, which is the impersonal nature of our lived experience, which is what enables us to be able to be more rapidly adaptable to these things called unintended consequences. It looks to me, and you know, if we're a group of, I've talked about this in corporate settings, that if we're a group of people who are attached to our identity and job descriptions, then the accountant person is going to always be wanting to control the finances, versus a group of people who put a bunch of toys on the table and say, God, what can we make now? You know, gifts and talents. That's exactly what it brought to mind, is I've used that exact same kind of concept. It's a real different energy, and it is going to, you know, create something brilliant or crazy or useless, and it doesn't matter, because you can just put the toys back in the table and grace. You know, it's like yeah, we didn't like how that turned out, let's do it again, because it's removing that personal nature of creation and seeing it as a shared experience, or a universal, or, you know, whatever word we attach to it. There's something in that what you described, what he said. And actually I remember having a client who had quite a lot of what he would call anxiety, and he said, I feel like, you know, the planet could just implode tomorrow. And I'm not really a climate change person, I don't know a lot of the bright ideas, but I remember turning around and saying to him, you know, well, it could implode tomorrow, like, what do we know? Don't hold to the idea that you can say, like, who knows? It sounds to me, from what the people I listen to say, that there are things that we can do that will take us off this definite destructive path, but, like, I don't know why we're not taking them then, you know. It seems like it's just a question I have an answer to as well, but but yeah, it's that accepting that the future is completely unknown in a good way and a bad way.
Yeah. And Cathy, you started to bring in, I do want to talk about your work now a bit as well, because you've just given that a couple of tantalizing examples of client work, and the seminar that you want to do more of. What does your work look like now?
Yeah. Right now, it's in a little bit of a resurgence. We've gone through a phase where my husband, in his brilliant consultancy career, was then offered he had been given the sort of the carrot of a possible job opportunity for probably about a year now, and it's on off. And then it suddenly became a lot more definite last year, and then it was on. And it involved a move to another part of the world. And then, of course, the next thing we're in Corona, and then it's off again. So it's been so funny, that they're kind of living in uncertainty and having plans and not having plans. There's a lot of humor around that. And so it felt as if the kind of the business side of what I did, the coaching the clients, it felt like I stepped back from actively looking for new clients. And usually what that means is that I get a very small dribble of one or two people asking to work with me, but I'm not doing anything actively to so that's how it's been for the last sort of year, maybe 2 years. And then recently what I've noticed is now we're in what clearly is an unknown, completely unstable situation of Corona. It suddenly feels like things are a bit different for me, because we're not going to be moving to the side of the world in the next 2 weeks, and probably not in the next 6 months. So it's interesting how, again, it wasn't our conscious decision. It's interesting how we notice ourselves doing certain things. And I noticed myself changing the coaching packages on my website completely. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And then the next thing, actually, I'd had an inquiry from somebody. That was what kicked. And I thought, well, gosh, I don't have anything to say to that person. Let me just make something up. So, you know, I made something up. Oh, these coaching packages. I'm so proud of myself. and then I'm being flippant, but that, you know, that's how it works, Robbie. You know that.
Wait, what's how it works?
We just make it up. And
how did you make it up in this case? You know, what was because you've been coaching for quite a while. You must have played in lots of different ways.
I've played in lots of different ways. And what I used to do is very much, you know, I guess traditional in the kind of circles that we move in, of having packages of 6 months or a year. That was pretty much how I worked with people. And I had it was quite a lot of time after I worked with Michael and became principals qualified. Not because of that, but just, you know, because of what I saw and what I wanted to do with people. I started to do work that involves spending a lot more time with people. So I'd usually kick off a coaching engagement with 3 days-ish. It started as 1 day and then 2 days, and then I'd kind of settled on 3. And so that was kind of the model that I had.
So you do 3 days with people?
Yeah.
Kind of intensive. And then what would happen over the rest of the?
Well, and then we just talk and then we kind of make it up as we go through the rest of the year. So with some clients, it looks like I had one client actually who had such massive insights during the first 3 days. We almost could have not spoken for the rest of the year, and it would have been, he'd have got out of it what he felt was, his money's worth and time's worth. And so we spoke over the rest of the year. And then I've had other clients where we've done that, and then we speak usually about every 2 weeks. And then it might vary. I might get to a point where I feel like, I want to spend another day with this person, or I want to spend another half day, or I just get a sense of I want to spend more or less time, or let's speak once a month, or whatever it is. And usually I'll finish it up with, again, something, let's do a half a day or something where we can meet face to face.
And how did you?
What I wanted to say was though actually that in the past, so that's been my model for a few years now, and so I hadn't consciously been aware, but it's almost like I put my business on hold. That's how it's felt with this potential move, and so this resurgence recently, I completely redesigned it, and I've just put up a page it's probably 2 months ago now, where I decided not to do the intensive. I've got packages at the moment which just involve, starting off with weekly conversations and hour and all on. It was always pretty much online anyway, but now obviously completely online. And I might have somebody come along with an inquiry and decide to do something different. But so that's how it looks now. It looks like I work with people for 3, 6, or 12 months, and we speak on Zoom and.
Some coaches might have never even heard of the idea of doing an intensive at the start of an engagement, or if you call it that, or those 1, then 2, then 3 days. How did they used to work? Like, how much time was it? But also, what did they give you that you didn't get if you didn't do them, if that makes sense? Or what did they give the client?
The answer that comes to mind is a year's worth of coaching in 3 days, but that's too flippant, really. It's too kind of it's an answer and it's kind of not an answer. I think for me, it gave me really a sense to really understand that person much more. Obviously, we have intake sessions, and I'll speak to people usually once, sometimes twice, before they sign on or not. So, I'm sure that's a very common way of starting engagement. So I've already spoken with somebody for a few hours, and a lot of my clients are people that know me in some way. So already we've got some relationship, even if it's a bit one-sided. And I think the intensives allow me to really see what's going on for that person everywhere, and to really be as present as possible with them for the time that we have. And it also, they tend to be a mix of teaching and coaching. So it tends to be that I will want to talk a bit more about the principles understanding and what that is, so that ideally so that sparks something for them.
Yeah. And would you do them in person or online?
Yeah. And the reason I changed recently was because I just thought, there's no reason why I can't do them online. It's not, I think the model's just what it is, but I just felt like I didn't really want to do them online at this moment in time, and that might change next week. So at this moment in time, I just don't feel like it. I'm just going to do this.
But there is something different. I don't know. I think we're all learning that in the age of complete Zoom and nothing else in the last few months. There's something really different about being it's always been there, but when we're not spending any, like, I'm aware when, I work on a leadership, one of the things I do is a leadership program I work on, and we decided to continue running it online, which is great, and the university it's with wanted to do that, which is fantastic, and the people are getting loads and loads from it, but it's a different experience trying to do it online. And I imagine that those clients that got the 1, 2, 3 days in person, that's not something they're going to forget anytime soon, right?
And it takes, we'd all talk about that, taking somebody out of the office kind of thing. So
where did you used to do them?
Days. I did them in various places, actually, partly depended on the client. So I had, sometimes we do them in London. There's a room that I used to rent in London, but we did different things. I remember one client who wanted to, so when I lived down in Dorset, and she came down and rented a little Airbnb in, actually I've had a couple of clients do that. I've had somebody else come down to a beach hotel and rent a room, and then I'll go and we'll do it in a hotel room, or in her case, I remember she had a little Airbnb and we did it in so again, completely tailor-made depending on where the person is, what happens to be there for us, what else they're doing, what it feels like suggesting to them.
And so
but it allows them, I guess, to, if you know, I'm aware of this with some of the clients that I've got at the moment, is I know that as soon as we finish the Zoom call, they're going to get on another Zoom call with somebody else.
Right.
And you know, their staff or their team, or they've got a team meeting, or they've got some other meeting, and some of my clients like, yeah, I'm sure are spending a lot of time on Zoom. And so it allows the settling, and it's not that I couldn't say to them, we're going to take an hour and a half, and by the way, for the last 30 minutes I'm going to instruct you to go and walk around your block. Like, I could do that too. I remember one of my supervision calls with Michael, actually, when I was doing my advanced qualification. There was a moment in the call when we were talking about something the client had got some, you know, she'd enjoyed doing, I think it was yoga, it may not have been yoga, I can't exactly remember. And I remember Michael asking me in the supervision call, did I get the idea to just ask her to take a break and go and do this thing? And I thought, actually did. I did get the idea, and we didn't. But so there's no rules around what we can and can't do on online. That was a Zoom call as well. So there are no rules around the fact that I can't tell somebody, take a break, come back, get a glass of water, go and walk around the block. And, you know,
there's a great story. Sorry, just what comes to mind. There's a great story that Rich Litvin tells about when he was working with Michael Neill, and Michael was his coach or whatever. And he was like, rocked up to the coaching session, and Michael asked him what he wanted to focus on. He's like, well, I want to know why I'm not writing this article. And Michael said, well, how long do you think it'd take? He was like, I don't know, about an hour. And Michael said, well, you do it now. I'll go on mute. And then Michael sat there, did something else while Rich banged out the thing, which is a great bit of coaching.
It's a great bit of coaching. And I actually, I hadn't heard that particular story, but it's absolutely typical of Michael. I can tell you that. And that's how it feels, that I feel like I can ask people to do that. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I think that's the thing about the intensive, is that it literally is more time. So if you say we're going to go out for tea and cake, or go for a walk on your own, I just need a bit of, you know, you can just make it up as you go along, and you've got no clock ticking on it.
Yeah. And it's, you know, a couple of other things that come to my mind. One is when I was starting out, I used to coach in the Royal Festival Hall quite a lot, in the members area there. And like, when I did that...
Oh, I know, that's on the South Bank, isn't it?
On the South Bank,
that kind of wooden sort of deco-ish.
So it's in the it's in the main bit of the South Bank Centre, which is kind of opposite Charing Cross and things. But it, you know, I would lost count of the number of clients who, when they, at some point during meeting them there, would say, I love coming here, but like, and they would talk about the story of how they walked along the river afterwards, taking a slightly longer route back, or the traveling from the office was almost as good, you know, and it's like, those things do matter. And the other one is just that there's something about, you know, one of the things that is interesting to think about as coaches is, you know, when people think about, often you get into these conversations about people paying fees. And one of the things I always, you know, I've had examples of clients like this. It's like the time when they realize they're going to commit money and time for themselves is sometimes like the most important bit of the work. And in some ways, and you know, what a beautiful thing for that. I think you said a woman who came down and rented the Airbnb in Dorset.
We're still talking about the ponies, you know.
What an amazing thing for her to do, you know, for herself. And she'll never, like, that's the thing that she, you know, how often maybe twice maybe in my life, or in my adult life, have I gone off on my own for some reason. And you know, we don't often do that, and it's
we don't, and it's an interesting, like you know, talks about the moment of commitment. And I remember a client who wouldn't do that. He said, I'm not prepared to spend what we're going to do in these 3 days. And like, I knew I could have just said, well, we just want to do the 3 days. And I just said to this guy, no, we're just going to do it. And if you don't want to do it, that's fine. Go and work with somebody else. But this is, if you work with me, this is what we're going to do. And I don't always say that, but there's just something about, I guess somebody who's listening to this as a coach, and particularly for the newer coaches, is something about just listening to what's true for you in that moment. And if you need to put your foot down and make a stand for something, it's not, again, you don't know how things will turn out. Like, this guy didn't work with me, and yet he could have said, yeah, you know what, I'm going to. But to me, I just felt like that's what I wanted to say in that moment. The client with the, yoga exercises or whatever, in the moment I didn't follow, I had the idea and I didn't follow it through. And that's not, again, not right or wrong. It just is, it's so beautiful when you just have such freedom to make it up. And yeah, you just coming from that space of complete love and creativity and listening to somebody and just thinking, what would be the thing that allows you in this moment just to settle down a bit.
Yeah. And it feels like we're talking back to that attunement, to what's relevant, right? It's like, I'm sure you're not thinking this, but you're just in the moment. And it's, what's the right thing to say in this moment to this guy who doesn't want to do the 3-day intensive? Yeah. And actually, it's this. And so you're not attached to what the outcome of that is. Again, it's not, no, the forks must be down or up or whatever.
That looks so crazy. I mean, at some point we made up forks, like the fact that we'll be attached to them being up or down in a particular way, it looks absolutely ridiculous, doesn't it, when you really think about it?
We have all kinds of, our versions of those conversations happen here as well. Don't worry. It's not just you. Cathy, I'm curious. So you kind of touched on what especially coaches starting out, might ask. And, this interesting thing you said a few minutes ago, over the last couple of years, what happens when you don't do anything is that you end up with just a couple of clients, like, ticking along. Yeah. When you're doing things, what are you doing?
Yeah. I know, and not doing anything, I mean, even that sounds like it's like a conscious not doing, isn't it? It's not that either. It's just sometimes I notice my life is a bit quieter, and sometimes, like at the moment, it bizarrely feels a bit busier, even though I didn't feel there was any conscious decision. So I do a few things. I found myself a few years ago feeling like I was a bit disconnected. I was spending too much time in this online world, and I guess the kids were maybe a bit older as well, and I thought I want to start going back to things. That was actually when I became, I think probably around about the time we first met, I became a fellow at the RSA, and thought I'm going to just show up some events in person just to meet interesting people. Also, I had, probably before that actually, I had kind of accidentally got involved in a circle of group of people who were curious about impact investing. One of my very, very first overseas positions back in, the late 90s, 95 or something, was setting up a microfinance fund. And so I was kind of curious about impact investing. Microfinance has got a bit of a bad rap these days. And so I was kind of curious about money and investments and how that might, in developing countries, not in the UK. So I was curious about that. So I had become involved with this group and taken over. I'd set up with a associate, somebody I just met. We set up a group, and so I co-led that group. So there was a place a few years ago where I found myself just wanting to go out and do the things that seemed interesting for me. And so, but I say that because, attending events and taking on something as a kind of pro bono leadership role, these were things that I just felt were interesting for me. And I was just following my own curiosity and doing the things that were not about coaching or being in coaching or, looking for clients or just things. And I've got clients from both of those places and other places as well. And I don't know how true this is. It's something I find myself repeating, and I don't quite know how it works. But what I say is that I find there's something about being out in the world and just doing stuff that creates a kind of momentum. And so, more clients seem to bubble up. But I think what it's probably reflecting is that my energy is in a particular phase. And so I imagine the going out in the world and doing things, again, it sounds like an action. If you're a coach looking for clients, go out in the world and do things, and then by some miracle of magic, the clients will appear. I think, again, it's an explanation rather than a prescription.
Yeah. Oh, but I think there's probably a little bit of truth in it. If we think that, if we think about the complexity again, it's like one of the things you can ask in complexity is, what can I do to enable good things to happen? And like, that's better than how can I control what happens? Because in complexity, you probably can't control anything. But you could create some conditions, and a condition might be, I often find myself saying or thinking, you can be sure that if you never leave the house and never talk to anyone about the fact that you're a coach, you won't have any clients. So
I'd say that's not. I'm so
you
sure.
can almost be sure.
I don't know. I sometimes never leave the house, and I still have clients.
Yeah, it's already happened though. If you had never told anyone you were a coach, it would be very hard to get clients. I would argue that some awareness that you do this work enables more clients to exist.
Yeah, I know. I think that's true, and but I wouldn't want to make it a rule. I had a client that I sat next to on a plane one time, and he called me about a year later and said, "You don't remember me, but I've joined your email list after we met on the plane." And yes, of course, like, I'm out there in the world doing things.
There we go. There's the mailing list is the I'm out in the world. I am a coach. Someone knows. There's a website you can find me.
Yeah. The there's something I was going to say. Then I've just lost it. It'll come back.
or it won't.
Or it won't.
Either way is perfect.
It won't.
Yeah. And so what else?
It was the energy. I know what it was. It was the energy of the good, doing good things in the world. And one of the things that I hear in my head, I hear it quietly in my head, is, I want to say it's a Sid Banks quote, but it's one of those things that we say is like coming from the higher self. I've talked about pouring love on things, and again, it's that description of the attunement. Am I coming from this sort of higher self, or am I in my personal mind? And that's the going out and doing good things in the world with a good intention. And there's something about that. And I think a lot of to put this around the going out looking for clients thing, we don't do things either because we don't want to do them. We just don't want to do them, and we think we should, or somebody told us that that's the way to do things, and it's not really what we're that interested in. Like, I don't want to go and run a marathon. It just doesn't seem like the thing I want to do. And I could find lots of reasons why I should be going out running, and I've got all this time, and it's the lockdown, and everybody's out there with it. I could make up some story about it, of course, but I'm fairly well tuned into what I do and don't want to do. Like, I'm going to put that in the don't want to do box. And that might change, by the way. That's not a fixed thing. But so there's that, or else there's we might have an interest in doing it, but we kind of put lots of imaginary obstacles in our path for that. So maybe I have a curiosity about endurance running, but I'm worried about my pain, or I can't get the right shoes, or am I going to get mugged on the country? Like, I put lots of obstacles in. It's going to be really hard, and it's going to be, I have a lot of, in the principles say, I have a lot of thinking about it. I have a lot going on in my head, and I'm allowing those things to hold me back from experimenting. So actually putting on the running example, my oldest son was at home for a while. Lives in Australia, and he said he's always been very fit and active, but he's done things like, he was a big road cyclist. He liked his road cycling, and he did climbing. So he's not unfit and unathletic, but he came to me one day. I've always been a runner. Mom, I'm going to run every day. And I just laughed, and I said, well, that seems like setting up a standard, to fail against. Why would you even say that? Why don't you just go for a run today and then see how you feel tomorrow? And sure enough, the running lasted 3 days, and then he decided that it wasn't his thing. But we make up a lot of stuff from stopping ourselves, that holds us back from taking that first step. And so one of the things that I'm more tuned into in myself, and I kind of watch for it in other people, and it relates to what I saw in that conversation about the election last year, is where I do and don't have an agenda about something in the smallest way. And I might have an agenda, but am I prepared to let it go and just take the smallest step and then see what that leads to? So in relation to kind of going out and doing stuff in the world, and I'm sure that there are people sitting here thinking, gosh, I really love this thing called coaching, and I'd like to do more of it, and I'd like to do it better, who could get on a Zoom call with somebody. I know Rich talks about this, and just who do you want to speak to, and could just do something, or join the gym, or put up. So, I'm everywhere in my life. I think about, gosh, I could just stick up a bit of paper, and I go to the gym and I think, all these people at force, why don't I just stick up a bit of paper and say, let's have a lunchtime chat about what it takes to have a wonderful experience at the gym. And not, I don't, because I'm like not that interested in doing it, but I have all of the time, like I'm sure I'm not the only person who has 1,000,001 ideas, and
and they
don't have to lead to anything.
Yeah, but this is, I think, we're in a really interesting part of how change happens, right? That tension, because how do you both acknowledge the things you would like to happen in the future? I'm not sure if this is quite the right question, and act with kind of towards them without attachment, without so much attachment that it stops you, because that's sometimes what happens with all those stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah. And I had a really interesting conversation with a friend recently about this, who's been going through a few ups and downs with his girlfriend partner. And we talked about exactly this. He said, I really love her and I really want to stay with her. And we talked about that. I've been with my husband for a long time now, and we were talking a lot around attachment and engagement with something and what we want the future to look like. And I think it's one of those things which are paradoxical, like a lot of life appears to be. You're nodding. Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
It's one of those perfect examples of a paradox, which is that in relation to my partner, I cannot possibly imagine that we're going to split up and not be together until one of us, like, it just doesn't seem there's anything that, how could that possibly happen? And yet at the same time, it could happen tomorrow. And I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. By the way, so I'm not like I'm out there, looking at the neighbour and thinking, no, you're not the one. I mean, who doesn't do that? But it's so interesting. And in his case, what we were talking about was that line between, we know when we're attached to something, it has a different feeling to it. It has a tightness and a stickiness and it can push us into that like energy, or even excitement energy. Like I feel it a lot with I talk about the No Forward agenda. I feel it a lot like with my new project. I'm talking to a friend, we're planning to do, I get all excited and we have 1 million and we go off and we do this and this and this, and next thing we're kind of 10 steps down. Like, it's exciting. And I also know that, that's really exciting. Let's do that. And then let's just stop and say, okay, this is the email we're going to send. This is the thing we're going to do. And how aware am I of whether I want that to lead to something and what the touch point is? And I think it's inevitable that we will move. If we're engaged with something, I think it's inevitable that we'll move into this thing that we call attached. And as coach, with the discussion, my friend was sort of laughing and saying, it's so coach, isn't it? Like attached good, engaged good, and attached bad. At what point does one thing become the other? And it's not that one thing is good or bad, but it's just that the attachment is going to close us into a place where we can't see the possibilities, and we're not really listening to the other person because we're only listening to how much they are going to do the thing that we want them to do. So to me, it's a more closed off, less laughing at you laughing.
I'm laughing. Yeah. Well, it's also making me think that I always say it slightly differently to how it actually, I can't remember who originally said it, but I heard it from Robert Holden, which sticks with me, which is what I try and remember in those moments when I might be getting blinkered. And the quote is, I'll find a link to the actual quote. This is not the actual quote. This is this is the actual quote, the deep world of wisdom with my 5% flavor. God spoke to me in flowers, but I almost missed it because I was waiting for words. Yeah, it's like when we're right down, we miss everything. Who knows what the world might be who knows what possibilities the world might be trying to throw our way, but we miss it because we're so head down, blinkers on.
Yeah, absolutely. The little, I was speaking with somebody yesterday in a group, and we were talking about body awareness. I'm not the real kind of, the energy Reiki, like I'm not really in that zone. And sometimes it makes me a bit uncomfortable because I think, is that like a whole new dogma of things that I should really be, I'm like that's just not my thing. But at the same time, I also notice how when I am more tuned into, it's a kind of a slowing down. Like I said at the beginning of the call, I've been aware the last last week I've had a couple of headaches, and it's like, oh, okay, I've got this headache. That's interesting. It's like a sensitivity to the quieter messages.
Yeah. Yeah, and mostly, well, there is a pattern in modern life. I don't want to say mostly because I don't know if that's true, of moving very fast.
Yes, and so ignoring them, and
but not even noticing them. I don't think it's as active as ignoring. I mean, sometimes it's ignoring, but a lot of the time it's just not even noticing.
Yeah, a coach friend of mine tells a story. He tells it repeatedly on stage of like the kids when the kids are little, and this could be anything. That I noticed it with the dog as well. That when the dog pulls the newspaper off the kitchen surface and shreds it, there were 10 messages before that. The dog was just a little bit bored. And it's like the kids, coming, daddy, daddy, it's the child didn't do that. The child asked you for something or pulled at your skirt, or there were 10 other quiet messages which you didn't hear, or you heard and kind of pushed away, or you heard and made some logical sense out of. So what was the question? The question was about attachment, wasn't it? And from a coaching new coach client perspective, I think the biggest, these are terrible how-to lessons, Robbie, but the biggest thing is just the biggest thing is to notice, because you said like you can feel it, the noticing, and try and avoid like labeling one thing good, one thing bad, but just notice. That's attunement seems to be the word of the day, doesn't it? But noticing. And for me, I think where does noticing come from? Noticing is this thing that suddenly we notice, and there's something before that as well. And that for me is this kind of the innate intelligence is telling me something, the my body or whatever it is, the signals are out there. And so what might that open up for me if I'm just a little bit more present?
Yeah.
An aeroplane going over.
Here we go. In this moment, let's do it. A helicopter just went over me. What's the signal,
so weird.
Kathy? What's the signal there?
Well, I heard it. I just heard a plane. I thought it was on my plane. Yeah, I mean, nothing really. Just how we can be, like, I felt just in that moment, like suddenly very present with you, and then at the same time there's this outside noise. And there was a guy, I hope he doesn't mind me telling this story, he didn't give me permission to share it, but on these RSA monthly calls that we're running at the moment, we did one about society, the individual in society. It seems to be one of the topics people were interested in talking about in relation to lockdown and corona, and how suddenly we're in this sort of different feeling of society. And there was a guy came on the call, and I think the question we'd gone into the small groups with was, how do you know when you're in society? And so he'd come back and described a situation when he came on the call. There were some kids playing outside his window, and he'd got a bit like, oh, you stupid kids, you're disturbing me from because we talked about the feeling, and that feeling of being connected. And I noticed a lot of people wanted to make it a nice thing, society is this good thing, and then he described these kids outside his window. But what was even more interesting was in the moment he was describing something which he had felt in his experience at the beginning of this call. 20 minutes in, we've been in these groups, he's coming back, he's in that moment, I don't know if the kids were still outside his window or not, but he was completely present with us. And it was so funny, he wasn't in his irritation that he'd been 20 minutes ago. He was just right there relating this story of this irritation. And so quickly, in a kind of society context or an individual context, we leap to make meaning and take action on this thing that's already been gone.
Right. Yeah.
They need ASBOs, and they need a curfew, and they shouldn't be playing in my garden, like they should put sound walls up at the school across the road that you said we might hear. It's like, really? What if you just heard it and it didn't mean anything?
Right. Yeah. It's another kind of paradox, isn't it? It's like, I think there's a paradox there, because we've just kind of said, listen for the signal from the universe. Any noise could mean anything. And then we're saying and laughing about, and don't make too much meaning out of things, because like you'll just be thinking about those kids for the next 10 hours or 10 days. Are you really still angry about the forks and the kids outside and the helicopters that always go over in the middle of podcast recordings or whatever it is,
But it's absolutely paradoxical. That's exactly the sort of thing a client might say. Yes, but Cathy, how do I make sense of this?
Yeah.
What are you telling me to listen to?
What would you say to them, Cathy?
I don't know, but I'd to me, there's a difference between, I suppose it comes back to that, am I my higher self kind of question. And there's a difference in the energy we're carrying around the forks and the helicopter and the noisy kids in the playground, or the political party that's, so against my values, and these idiots that we seem to have. Number 10. Apologies to anybody who's a Boris supporter, but he's not universally an idiot, I'm sure. I'm
not sure
funny.
I believe that you think that.
I know. As I'm saying it, I do genuinely believe that nobody is completely. I feel most of the time, actually, I just feel kind of despairing for how he must experience his life, feeling like he's, got this image of himself. I'm guessing, obviously, I don't know him personally, but he looks like somebody who carries his persona quite as if it's quite real. So the listening for signals, I think there's a difference between, and again, the feeling of knowing that I'm getting agitated about the kids outside versus really.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know that higher self might be Sid Banks.
It may not be.
I love that phrase, and it's in one of the books I'm working on at the moment to describe exactly this feeling. And I was trying to think, what's the sense that
first person who said it.
Of course not. But it's a nice. It might. Well, if it is him, it's a nice little bit of symmetry. I think I first heard it from Stephen Pressfield in The War of Art. But it's a great, I like that. For some reason, I really like that phrase as one to describe what you were talking about with being able to attune to what's relevant, Jordan Hall, like I say, he called it being sovereign. But yeah, for me, there's definitely a different feeling, and we can. And I know if I'm going slow enough to notice, then I know when I'm in that and when I'm not, and when the conversation about forks is about, it's not really about forks when it feels like it's about existence, in some way. And when it's a conversation, between two people who are feeling pretty close to that higher self, and it actually is about, playfully about forks, which is quite nice.
Yeah, which is funny. And Robert Holden talks about love a lot. He's the love guy as much as anything. And I wanted to say that out loud, because words like sovereign, which actually, interestingly, I remember a couple of years ago, I was with a friend of mine, but we were looking at how I kind of communicate what I do, and she used that word. She said, "Oh, it sounds like you're getting people," and I didn't take it on, and I didn't use it, because for me it felt a bit more kind of macho ego as a word. It felt like I'm this kind of sovereign, the king sort of empire, it had that kind of connotations with it. And so the reason I'm saying this out loud is because that word had particular connotations. That's not how I heard you say it, and that's not how I heard you describe.
But what's interesting about that, because of course within Britain, for people who are really anti-Brexit, it's a tough word because it was a Brexit argument. So if anyone who's a Remainer listening, probably as soon as they heard me say the word sovereignty, started, I don't know, having flashbacks to Nigel Farage. But what was really interesting when I discovered, I was talking to I think it was my mum sent me this thing. It was definitely my mum who sent me this thing. I'm gonna butcher it now, but I'll find it and attach it. But it was an essay written by a woman who studied Celtic goddesses about I'm pretty sure about the goddess sovereignty. Okay. And how it's so interesting, right, that you bring it in that it does have and can have a macho feel, and the sovereign being the king and all that kind of thing. And it was really interesting to try and, listen for, okay, well, how are this kind of weird American futurist that I've stumbled across and this essay about Celtic goddesses talking about the same thing? Are they? And where does that?
Yeah, and it sounds like they are. And I think the reason I want to kind of emphasize the word point is it's not about finding the right word. And there are a lot of people I know in my coaching circles. A lot of people, let me say it's differently. There are people I'm very close to in my coaching circles who place a lot of emphasis on the word, and I feel like I go more and more in the other direction, And Michael talks about this, and this kind of this higher self, this thing that we're pointing to. He talks about it like pointing to fire with ice. It's almost like the nearer you get to it, the harder it is. And I wonder if it's a thing in English. Do we just not have the right words? I was talking with this friend and colleague that we might do something on these provocative questions for social change. And she's not a principles person. She's not a coach. She's in a completely different world of technology. And she was brought up in a very kind of spiritual household. Her parents are Hindu, or at least one of her parents is Hindu. And I said, what would your word be for it? And she said, I don't know really. I just wanted to do some kind of, like nice fancy word that would feel very wonderful. And eventually she said, well, divinity, I guess, is what we would call it. And so, whether we call it sovereign, divinity, higher self, love, it feels like if somebody can listen for what we're talking about, rather than what any of the words might trigger for them, I think they'll be closer to it.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to talk about this thing, which, yeah, you're right, it turns out, unplanned, has been the topic of this podcast to a certain extent. I'm aware, Cathy, that we're almost kind of probably at time.
Yeah.
Before we finish, is there anything that I'm curious what's coming up for you a little bit, but also if there's anything else that you just wanted to share before we finish?
It feels like, and I'll say this for the benefit of coaches, it feels like I'm on this never-ending journey. All of the things that we're talking about are things that are so present for me. I'm not talking about them because they're kind of interesting conceptual points. It's because these are the points that I seem to want to keep going deeper with. And this, I know we didn't talk much, but we talked a bit at the beginning about this overlap between the leverage that we have with the concrete nature of circumstances and what we do versus some of the higher self and the internal and the more freedom of mind focused discussion like that. For me, that's a really interesting place to bring my different parts of what I've done together, and to wonder how to what that looks like in other people. I guess wonder how to kind of bring that into something that is a conversation with other people. That just looks really interesting. So I'm saying that because these are things that are interesting to me, and you as a coach or whatever listening to this, you'll have the things that are interesting to you. And what's been really most productive for me has been going deeper with this exploration and seeing the difference between an understanding of how we work as people, which I think is what all coaches, ultimately, I think that is what coaching is. Seeing the difference between that versus the kind of concrete skills and rules of the games that we choose to play in the world. And I think sometimes for, I can only say this is true for me, but I can see where those things have become confused. And when I've seen the difference in them, that's been very freeing for me. So, and business is one of those where it feels like everything gets mixed together. And actually, when we see something new, if I want to go, and I was out kayaking actually with my neighbour last night. I'm not very good at kayaking. And I said, feel free to give me kayaking tips, which was very, very generously withheld from criticizing my kayaking technique. Clearly there's a kayaking technique that if he said do this and hold your paddle this way, and generally we found that this works better. There's some techniquey stuff, and then there's some presence as well. I noticed, and partly perhaps because he wasn't giving me a lot of the techniquey tips, me being present with the river. We started off going upstream, and so the kayak has a tendency to go this way and that way, and the water's flowing against me. And it was just interesting being in the river and noticing the flow of the water and noticing my response and what worked better and what didn't work better, and knowing that there was a technique. I wasn't bothered that he didn't give me any technique for kayaking, just sitting there enjoying the birds more than anything. But but like the separation of those two things are both helpful, and they are different, and I can play one game and I can play the other game, and I can bring them together and have an incredible experience. But it's, for me, it's the being present is the thing that I'm most interested in exploring. But that doesn't mean that there are not concrete things that are the rules of the games that we choose to make up this thing we call kayaking, with a boat a certain shape and these stupid metal things with plastic bits on the end. Like, we made it up and it works better if we use them this way. Oh, what fun. You know, there's the engaging in the game and not just the contemplation. So I think for coaches, I guess what I'd say, see the difference between those two and take on the concrete stuff as much as you want, but just realize it's all made up and have fun with it, and yeah, play both games.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, just like you say, even noticing that it's a made-up game. You know, you talked about uncoupling money and coaching before.
Yeah.
You know, it's a game you're playing. When you say they are paying for me and my value is dependent on the money they're paying, that's a made-up game.
That's just nonsense. Yeah. It's just crazy nonsense.
Cathy, before we finish, I realised I didn't ask before. If people are really interested in the 3 principles, where do you point them, or where would you point them?
Well, we talked about Michael a lot. I think
is
Michael's
it him? I mean, I think the Inside Out Revolution is that his book that kind of brings that to life?
He has a couple of books. Actually, I've got it on my desk at the moment. I'll point to Michael, but there are lots of people. I've got the Inside Out Revolution on my desk. My favourite of his books actually is The Space Within, which is kind of over there somewhere. I listen to it on audio. All his books are very accessible. They're quite short. They're very easy to read. It's a very entertaining guy to listen to. Some people get a bit turned off because they think it's a bit too intellectual or not deep enough, and it's not that the depth isn't there. That's just what they hear. You know, so he's not obviously everybody's particular flavour, but I think he's very accessible. And I think for coaches particularly, because he's one of the few principles practitioners who talk about the principle in a coaching context. There are others, but a lot of the general conversation around the principles is not about implementation in the world that we know as coaching. Mike obviously does that, and he's got a Supercoach Academy. So that's, for coaches, probably a good first entry. And then there's an organisation called the 3PGC, the 3 Principles Global Community, who it's much more general. And actually, if you go on something like, I think on YouTube, they do webinars. Association Principles practitioners can join, but they publish all of their webinars on YouTube, so you'll find a lot of people that you've never heard of having conversations that may go, that's miles over your head. But if that's something that you're curious about,
you've just described YouTube as a whole, isn't it? It's just millions of people you've never heard of. But great, it's good to know that there's that resource there.
But I think in general, because people find different principles practitioners, that's their flavour, and you'll find a lot of different people talking about the exact same thing at the end of the day. So if you find Michael's not your cup of tea, then go to 3PGC on YouTube and find out somebody's flavour of tea you happen to like.
Nice. Obviously, that's only one part of a brilliant, wide-ranging conversation, Cathy. But thanks so much for playing in all these different ways and spaces. It's been a total pleasure to have this conversation with you. There are probably a bunch of other little forks that we could have gone down, but
for sure.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And yeah, I'll see you again. And I should say, actually, because we have touched on a lot of things. For anyone listening, I will put, said this as we go, I will put links to the things I can in at thecoachesjourney.com. But other than that, Cathy, thanks, and until next time.
Thanks, Robbie.